Some people board a plane just like any other passenger. They sit quietly, make no complaints, ask for nothing but a seat and a peaceful journey. But sometimes, amidst a cramped cabin, there are people who carry more than just luggage. They carry history. They carry memories etched into the very lifeblood of this country. And then, a single request, a seemingly minor imposition, can awaken an entire forgotten epic. This is the story of a seat taken and a respect returned, a story you won't forget by the time you reach its final line. My name is Walter Briggs, 78 years old. Just an ordinary man with silver hair and a left knee shattered long ago during the Battle of Khe Sanh. I can't run anymore, but I still walk. I can't climb mountains, but I still stand. And that morning, I only hoped for one thing: to sit in the seat I'd reserved 3 months earlier. Seat 14C, aisle, with just enough legroom for my aching knee. I arrived at Gate 27, Denver Airport, at 5:15 a.m. for my flight to Annapolis, where my granddaughter Emily was graduating from the United States Naval Academy. That little girl was raised on sacrifice. Her father worked the railroads, her mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and now she was the second in our family to wear the uniform, after me. There was no way I could miss that moment. I wore an old brown coat, black slacks, and shoes with worn-down heels. People might have passed me by, just another lone old man, and I'm used to that. But with every step I took, every time I bent my left knee, it played an old tune in my chest. Bombs falling, bullets screaming, the cries of 50 years ago. That seat, 14C, might mean little to someone else, but for me, it was the only way. To sit without grinding my teeth in pain. I boarded with my group. No delay, no special requests. I nodded a quiet thank you to the gate agent, gripped the handrail as I walked through the jet bridge, and eased into my seat with the care of someone who's survived a lifetime of hurt. I tucked my small duffel under the seat ahead of me and exhaled slowly. A rare moment of peace. But that peace didn't last long. I heard murmurs from up front, gradually rising in volume. A flight attendant, early 30s, hair pulled tight, a stiff smile, was talking to someone, then tapped quickly on her tablet. Her brows furrowed. And then she walked straight toward me. "Hello, sir," she said, not gently. "Are you seated in 14C?" I looked up and nodded slightly. "Yes, that's correct. We have a family that was separated, mother and 2 small children. They need 3 seats together. And yours is the only one we can move." I looked at her. I didn't get angry. I didn't object. I just spoke plainly, slowly, like a man used to reading orders through gunfire. "I chose this seat for medical reasons. My left knee was injured in the war. An aisle seat helps ease the pain." She kept smiling, but her eyes didn't. "I understand, sir, but if you don't move, we won't be able to close the aircraft doors." I looked around. People were starting to notice, but no one said a word. Not a single voice spoke up. I didn't want to cause trouble. Didn't want to pull out my past to claim privilege. Didn't want to be that grumpy old man. So I nodded, stood up, and limped slowly back to 32B, the seat no one ever wants, dead center, wedged between 2 strangers. I sat down, biting back the pain shooting from my knee all the way to my hip. The people beside me didn't acknowledge me. Who was I? Just an average old man, someone who'd lived too long to matter. 9 minutes. I counted every second. The plane hadn't even taken off. No one said anything, but I knew I'd been pushed. Out of the seat I rightfully earned, not because of any fault of mine, but for someone else's convenience. And then, the cockpit door swung open. I didn't know it yet, but in the moments that followed, everything, my day, the flight, my life, was about to change completely. Seat 32B was never made for someone with a ruined knee. On either side of me sat 2 young people, heads buried in their phones, earbuds in tight like they wanted no part of what just happened. No one looked at me. No one said a word. Fine. I was too tired to fake a smile anyway. I leaned my head back and tried to breathe steadily. 1 minute. 2. The pain in my knee felt like a needle slowly piercing a tendon. Every heartbeat sent a jab through me. But that pain wasn't nearly as sharp as what was building in my chest. Humiliation. Not because they changed my seat. God knows I've lain flat on a battlefield with no water, no morphine, no one coming. But it was the way they did it, cold, indifferent, and dismissive, that choked me up. I've held dying men in my arms. I've written letters to mothers of boys I couldn't save. I taught my granddaughter how to stand tall and salute the flag. I'm not a hero, but I've tried to live in a way that honors the uniform I once wore, and now I was shoved to a seat by the toilet, like my presence was a burden to someone else's comfort. I glanced over at the flight attendant, Samantha, who was now smiling warmly at the young mother seated in 14C, baby on her lap, another child by her side. It was a cozy scene, if only it hadn't been built on someone else's pain. She caught my eye, and immediately looked away, pretending to fuss with her tablet. The cabin grew quiet. No one said a word, but I noticed a few of the older passengers scattered around glancing my way. They didn't speak up. Maybe they were afraid, maybe they were used to it, or maybe they understood. 7 minutes. I tried to stay still, but my knee began to spasm. I pulled an Advil from my pocket and swallowed it quickly with a sip of water from a plastic cup the attendant had handed me, without a word, without an apology. Like I was just an item to be managed and moved. 8 minutes. I heard rushed footsteps near the front. Someone whispered something to Samantha. She nodded. I didn't care anymore. I'd been pushed aside plenty of times before, but I never expected it to happen in the quiet of a plane cabin, on a flight in the heart of America. And then, click. The cockpit door opened, quietly, but loud enough for the entire cabin to turn. A man in a pilot's uniform stepped out. Stern face, eyes scanning the cabin, not as if he was looking for a person, but like he was searching for a bapper reason. Hi, said nothing. Just walked. Slow, steady, deliberate. I saw him, and he saw me. In that instant, time stopped. No one smiled. No one spoke. Even Samantha, who'd been all motion until now, froze. Her expression shifted from blank to confused. The captain stopped right next to me. "Are you Walter Briggs?" I looked up and nodded slowly. "Yes, that's me." "Naval officer, served at Quezon, 1968. This time I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him, eyes searching across the years between us. "Yes," I said. "And who are you?" He smiled. Not a pilot's smile, but the smile of someone who's carried a story for too long and finally has the chance to share it. "I'm the son of Sergeant Wallace." I went numb. I stared at him, at the pilot, this man in command of a 150-ton aircraft, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Recognition. Not the kind you get from a name tag or a boarding pass, but the kind that reaches. "Across decades, across foxholes and fire. You're Thomas Wallace's son?" I asked slowly. My voice caught somewhere between disbelief and something deeper. He nodded. Not with pride, not with pomp, just quiet truth. "Yes, sir. My dad always talked about one man who carried him out of hell during the Tet Offensive. A Marine named Walter Briggs. He said he wouldn't have made it home, wouldn't have met my mom, wouldn't have held me in his arms, if it weren't for that man." My chest tightened. I hadn't heard that name, Tommy Wallace, in a long, long time. Last time I saw him, he was bleeding out, mumbling something about a baseball game we never got to finish. I carried him on my back for a mile through jungle so thick it swallowed sound. I didn't think he'd make it, but he did. And now his son was standing before me, a full-grown man in crisp navy blues, captain of the very plane I was on, because I carried his father out alive. Andrew Wallace looked around the cabin. The silence was deafening. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice just enough, "the man seated here in 32B is not just a passenger. He's a veteran who saved my father's life. He was supposed to be seated in 14C. He paid for that seat months ago, not out of luxury, but because he earned it, with his service, his pain, and his integrity." He turned to the flight attendant, Samantha, who was standing frozen halfway down the aisle. "Miss, I believe there's been a mistake." She stammered something inaudible. Her face was pale. "Please escort Mr. Briggs back to his original seat." I didn't move at first. The moment was too large, too heavy, but then I heard it, soft at first, then growing louder, clapping. It started with the older woman in row 31, then a businessman in a gray suit, then a younger couple across the aisle. Within seconds, the entire cabin was applauding, not the kind of applause you hear after a landing. This wasn't routine, this was respect. I stood slowly, knees stiff, heart pounding. As I walked back down the aisle, this time with no limp I could hide, I felt eyes on me, not judging, honoring. A man near row 17 stood up and saluted. I nodded. Samantha stepped aside, her eyes brimming with something that might have been shame. Or understanding. I didn't need her apology, I just needed my seat. I sat back in 14C, placed my small duffel under the seat, and exhaled. This time not from exhaustion, but from something closer to release. Captain Wallace came over once more. "Sir," he said, voice lower now, "I've waited a long time to say this. Thank you for giving me a father, for giving me a life." He didn't offer a handshake. He stood straight and saluted, right there, in front of everyone. I slowly rose again. Every muscle screamed, but I returned the salute. Not for me, not even for him, but for Tommy, for the boys who didn't make it out. For those who came home only to be forgotten. I don't remember much of the flight after that. I think I slept. Or maybe I just stared out the window, thinking about how a single moment, 9 minutes, could open a door closed for 50 years. I landed in Maryland just before noon. The sun was out, the breeze was mild, and the world smelled faintly of cut grass and jet fuel. But I was still partly on that plane, still feeling the echo of applause, the weight of a salute, the humbling clarity that someone had remembered, someone still cared. As I stepped through the terminal, pulling my worn duffel behind me, I caught sight of a tall figure in white standing just beyond the security line. Crisp navy dress uniform, buttons shined, had tucked under one arm. She looked older than I remembered, but stronger too. "Midshipman First Class Briggs," I said, squinting through my glasses. "My granddaughter broke protocol and ran straight for me." "Grandpa!" I dropped my bag and caught her in my arms. For a moment, all the pain in my knees, the long flight, the bitter taste of being dismissed, it all fell away. I held her tighter than I probably should have, but I wasn't letting go. "You made it," she whispered into my shoulder. "You actually made it." "Of course I did," I replied, steadying my breath. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." She pulled back, eyes brimming with the kind of tears you only cry when you've fought too hard for a dream and finally stand in it. "How was the flight?" she asked, wiping her cheek. I paused. "Complicated," I said, "but unforgettable." She didn't ask for more, and I didn't offer it just yet. We rode in silence for a while as she drove me toward the academy. The roads near Annapolis were lined with flags that flapped like whispers from the past. I looked out the window, watching cadets march in formation on the fields, polished shoes hitting pavement in perfect rhythm. It all felt so familiar, and yet so distant. Are you nervous? I asked. Terrified, she laughed. But I'm ready? I know you are, I said. You come from a long line of people who don't back down easily. She looked at me sideways. Is that your polite way of saying we're all stubborn? No, I smirked. That's my proud way of saying it. The ceremony was held at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. It was packed. Thousands of families. The air was thick with anticipation, with pride, and maybe just a hint of sunburn. I took my seat among the rows of folding chairs set up for family members. Some folks had balloons. Others had giant heads on sticks. I just had my old uniform cap resting on my lap. When her name was called, Midshipman First Class Emily Briggs, she walked tall across that stage like she owned every step. And in a way she did. She was the first woman in our family to wear that uniform, the first to graduate from the academy. And in that moment, I saw more than just a granddaughter. I saw the future of everything I had fought for, the country, the values, the blood we left behind. She saluted, took her commission, smiled through tears. When the ceremony ended and families poured onto the field, she found me again. You wore your old cap, she said. I figured it deserved one more day in the sun. You okay? She asked, suddenly more serious. Hesitated. Something happened on the plane, I finally said. I got asked to give up my seat, the one I paid extra for because of my leg. They needed it for a family. A flight attendant insisted I didn't make a scene. She frowned. That's awful. It was. I nodded. But then, the pilot came out. Turns out he was the son of a man I carried off the battlefield in '68. Her eyes widened. No way. He stopped the flight, made the whole plane recognize what I'd done, what we did back then. Emily didn't say anything for a moment. Then she put her hand over mine. Thank you, Grandpa. For what? That evening, after all the photos had been taken, after the caps were tossed, the hugs shared, and the sun began its slow descent over Annapolis, Emily and I sat on a weathered bench near the seawall. She was still in uniform. I was in my old navy blue blazer, the same one I wore to her father's wedding. The bay behind us shimmered like glass. Cadets walked by in clusters, laughing, glowing with the electricity of accomplishment. But we were quiet. Have you ever thought about it? She asked suddenly. Think about what? What does your name mean to people? What does it really carry? I glanced over. She wasn't being sentimental. She was being precise, like a cadet running through a checklist of honor and accountability, like someone who'd finally understood what the stripes on a uniform really stand for. I try not to, I replied, folding my hands. Names don't mean much if they're not lived right. She nodded slowly. You lived it right. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure I had. You see, wars don't end when you come home. For some of us, they echo in our joints, in our sleep, in the way we flinch at loud noises or the way we avoid questions that go too deep. I still remember the smell of jungle rot, the silence before an ambush, the way Wallace's blood soaked through my shirt as I carried him, praying to whatever God was listening that I wouldn't drop him. I lived, yes, but I carried things back that never left. You know, I never told your father about Wallace, I said, watching a sailboat cut through the water. Never told him what happened that day. I guess I thought it wouldn't matter. But it did, she said. His son became a pilot and remembered you. That's the part I can't shake, I murmured. All these years I figured everything I did had been folded into history, names on a memorial, stories too heavy for dinner tables. But when Andrew Wallace stepped out of that cockpit, looked me in the eye, and called me by name, it was like the war stopped, being a footnote. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. It became personal again. Emily was quiet. The breeze tugged at her sleeves. I think that's what service is, Grandpa, she said. You don't do it to be remembered. You do it so someone else gets to forget. For a while. You carried Wallace so he could raise a son. Now that son carried your story forward." She looked at me squarely. "And I will too." My throat tightened. She meant it. This wasn't just a girl in a uniform playing soldier. She understood what generations of our family had stood for. And she was choosing willingly to stand on that same line. "You know what my favorite part of today was?" I asked. She smiled. "Please don't say the cafeteria shrimp." "Close," I chuckled. "It was when you walked across that stage and saluted." "Why?" "Because you didn't just take an oath to defend the Constitution. You took on the weight of every Briggs who came before you, and you didn't flinch." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice steady now. "Thank you. You've made everything worth it." We sat there until the sky turned purple and the stars began to peek out from behind the clouds. I don't know how long we stayed. Time felt different in that moment. Less like a clock, more like a passing torch. And in the stillness, I realized something. Maybe we don't get to choose how we're remembered, but we do get to choose how we show up. In war, in my family, in silence. The next morning, I asked Emily if she could take me somewhere quiet, somewhere old. She smiled like she already knew where I meant. We walked together through the historic grounds of the Naval Academy, where stone paths bore the wear of countless boots and whispered the weight of names carved into plaques and hearts alike. The morning was still young, the air heavy with that solemn, sacred calm that only military places seem to carry. We arrived at the Naval Academy Chapel, its dome rising against the morning sky like a silent sentinel. I had seen photos of it, of course, but being there in person was something else entirely. Emily opened the heavy wooden door for me. I stepped inside and felt a silence that wasn't empty, but full of memories, of promise, of grief and honor all braided together like the flag folded at a military funeral. We walked to one of the side pews, and I lowered myself onto the polished bench with slow, deliberate care. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Just letting the bones catch up with the soul." She chuckled softly, then sat beside me, hands in her lap. The stained glass poured light across the floor like colored rivers, and for a moment, we just watched. No need for words. Then I reached into my coat pocket. From within, I pulled out something I'd carried with me for decades, a challenge coin. Not just any coin. This one bore the insignia of the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, the unit I bled with, the men I cried for, the ghosts that still walked beside me when the nights got too quiet. "This belonged to my CO," I said quietly. "He gave it to me the night before we moved out for Quezon. Told me if I made it back, I should give it to someone who'd carry the mission forward." Emily's eyes widened. "You kept it all this time? Through 2 wars, 3 moves, and the worst coffee the VA ever brewed." We both laughed, but my fingers gripped the coin a little tighter. "I was going to bury it with me," I admitted. "Figured that's where it belonged." She looked at me, waiting. "But yesterday, on that plane, something changed." I turned and looked her square in the eyes. I saw what it means when a man's story doesn't end with his war. When a son flies a plane because his father was carried home. When a granddaughter raises her hand and takes the oath. That's not an ending. That's a relay. I held out the coin. "So I'm passing it to you." Emily didn't speak. She just reached out with both hands as if receiving something fragile, something more than metal. She cradled it like it was alive. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Don't say anything," I said. "Just remember, and keep walking forward." A long silence fell between us, but it wasn't heavy. It was whole. Then she looked down at the coin in her palm. "I'll carry this," she said, "and when it's my time, I'll pass it on." I nodded. And just like that, something lifted. Not all the weight. I don't think that ever fully leaves. A man who's worn the uniform, but enough. As we walked out of the chapel, sunlight hit her collar, and for a moment I could swear I saw the faces of the men I once fought beside, smiling, nodding, proud. They weren't forgotten. They never would be. Home never felt quieter than when you walk back into it with something left behind. I stepped into my small Wyoming house, just as the afternoon light began cutting through the blinds, laying shadows across the old wooden floor like memories. Same walls, same creaky floorboard by the kitchen. The same dusty shelf where I kept my medals, folded flag, and a photo of me and my unit, back when our hair was black and our world was on fire. But I was not the same. I dropped my bag by the door, exhaled, and stood still. For the first time, in years there was no echo in my chest. The kind that usually came after another Memorial Day, another name etched into stone, another reminder that the world had moved on from men like us. But now, someone had remembered. The world had looked back. I made my way to the kitchen, put the kettle on like always. Then I walked over to the shelf and looked at that photo again. There we were, 6 of us, smiling like fools. One of them was Tommy Wallace. God, he was just a kid back then. I reached for a pen, pulled an old sticky note off the counter, and scribbled something. Your son flies now, and he remembers everything. Walter. I pressed it to the corner of the frame and stepped back. It was quiet in the room, but the kind of quiet that felt right, like peace, not absence. Later that night, I sat out on the porch with a blanket, on my lap and a glass of iced tea in hand. The stars were just starting to peek through the twilight, blinking like the eyes of old comrades checking in. I thought about Emily, about the weight of that coin in her palm, about the fire in her voice. When she said, "I'll carry this," I believed her. I've heard a lot of people talk big about service, about patriotism, but she meant it. Not for glory, not for medals, for meaning. And somehow, that brought me peace I didn't expect to find at this age. For years I'd lived with the quiet ache of being forgotten. I never blamed anyone. Time moves fast. Heroes get turned into statues or headlines or forgotten footnotes. That's just the way of it. But the salute on that plane, the applause, the coin in her hands, it told me we're still seen, and more importantly, we're still needed. The next morning I woke up early, poured my coffee black like always, and sat at my kitchen table with a small notepad. I began to write. Not a letter, not a memoir, just stories, short ones, honest ones, about the cold nights, the dumb jokes, the bad food, and the impossible choices. I didn't write to be read. I wrote to remember. And maybe one day, when Emily's hands are a little older, when she finds that old notepad in a drawer after I'm gone, she'll read them and smile, and she'll know she didn't just inherit a coin, she inherited a life. 1 week after returning from Maryland, I received a strange parcel. No return address, just a clean white envelope with bold, neat lettering, for Walter Briggs, with deepest respect. I opened the envelope with the small knife I always keep in the drawer. Inside was a neatly typed letter and a card bearing the emblem of the airline I had just flown with. I sat down, glasses already perched on my nose, and began to read. Dear Mr. Walter Briggs, my name is Andrew Wallace, captain of the Denver, to Annapolis flight last week. Since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the moment you stood up from your seat, not because of the injustice, but because of your humility, because you endured pain, not just physical, but something worse, being forgotten, and I won't let that happen. After the flight, I filed a report with the airline, not to complain, but to propose something I believe is right. Today, I'm Honored to inform you that our airline has officially named Seat 14C on all A320 aircrafts the Briggs Priority Seat. That seat will always be reserved for veterans, especially those who served in the United States Marine Corps. On the backrest of every such seat, we will print the words, "In honor of Sergeant Walter Briggs, for those who carried us all," and, "This is not a gift. This is a promise that those who once bore the lives of others on their shoulders will never again have to stand up to give up their place. Thank you, sir. And thank you for bringing my father home. Andrew. Wallace, Captain, National Sky Airlines. I didn't realize I was crying until drops fell onto the letter, smudging one of the lines. I folded it carefully, placed it into the drawer alongside my old medals and the photo of the unit I once served with. The next day I called Emily. "You won't believe this," I said, my voice still hoarse with emotion. "Your grandpa's name will fly in the sky forever." "Not just your name," Emily replied, "but everything you stood for." There was a pause, then she added, "I'm thinking, one day I'll sit in 14C too, and if someone asks why it's special, I'll tell them about you." I smiled softly, gazing out the window. The afternoon sun fell gently across the porch. The wind carried the scent of pine wood from the mountains. Everything was still the same, but I knew I had left something behind in the sky, not a badge, not a statue, but a reminder that sacrifice should never be silent. That sometimes a single seat can be where history begins again. We often think heroes must arrive with flags, titles, or grand speeches, but sometimes that hero simply sits in seat 14C with a wounded knee, a heart full of memories, and a dignity that never needed proving. And the most important lesson we've learned today isn't about war or honor. It's about kindness, about listening before judging, about asking why instead of issuing orders. Because every person, no matter how young or old, carries a story worth honoring. And if we take a moment to listen, just once, we might find in it a piece of ourselves.